around a little, like literally just kind of moved them an inch in various directions. And I can't quite seem to get things exactly the way I want them to look. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm also not going to worry about the fact that I think I overdid the lipstick, like I didn't apply it within the correct confines. And finally, I'm not going to worry about the fact that I have, I think, 4 books to review at this moment, and I don't have time. I just don't have time. I just need to stop piling things on, which means I should probably read fewer books. But for some of us, that's hard. Back to the book. Two Can Keep a Secret. This is the second time I've read it, and apparently it's the second time I actually listened to it. That doesn't surprise me so much, because by the time that I read Two Can Keep a Secret the first time, it was when I was kind of in full audiobook mode, where I decided that's how I'm going to get through my books. I guess I remember finishing it. And so, if you don't know about Karen McManus, she wrote One of Us Is Next, which has recently, depending on when you're watching this video, been turned into a Netflix show. And I need to go back and reread that one. I recently read... Oh my gosh. No, it's not One of Us Is Next. It's One of Us Is Lying. She wrote One of Us Is Lying, which was recently turned into a Netflix show. I recently read One of Us Is Next. And on that point, you don't necessarily have to read One of Us Is Lying to know One of Us Is, or to get One of Us Is Next. But at the same time, I felt like she was a little heavy-handed in her One of Us Is Lying drops. It made me think I need to go and read that book. But this one, aside from having a lot of characters show up, it has nothing to do with the original plot. We're not talking about One of Us Is Next. We're talking about Two Can Keep a Secret. And so I originally read Two Can Keep a Secret because I liked One of Us Is Lying. I thought it was a really smart, enjoyable book. I can't even tell you the last time that I read Two Can Keep a Secret, but it had been long enough that I decided to reread it. The first time I read Two Can Keep a Secret, I remember being underwhelmed. So, because tastes can change, because your reading level can mature, I figured, let me try it again. I was probably just as disappointed this time through as I was the first time. I can't quite pinpoint why. I think on the whole, it wasn't nearly as engaging. The characters, I mean, as I said, it's probably been 5 years since I've read One of Us Is Lying. But my impression was, or is, that the characters were much more interesting, much more engaging. I cared about them. I cared about their backstories, what was going to happen to them. This book, not so much. I do think, on one hand, so one of my favorite series is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. If you've ever listened to the audiobooks, the guy that narrates it has a very interesting cadence. And in the first book particularly, it is painful to listen to him. Eventually he gets the hang of things, and I think you just get used to listening to him. But that narrator is the narrator, or one of the narrators, in Two Can Keep a Secret. It was really difficult for me to listen to him, one, because I could only associate him with Miss Peregrine. Two, his cadence is just not enjoyable. And so while I could handle it here, I thought it made the narration a little stilted, a little dry. It was difficult to connect with his character. Which reminds me, I should probably Google what the characters' names are, because I've read 4 books since this novel, so give me a minute. There are 2 main characters in Two Can Keep a Secret, Ellery and Malcolm. Ellery and her twin brother Ezra are coming to Echo Ridge because their mother is in rehab. She had escaped Echo Ridge before they were born, after her twin sister had disappeared. We don't know a whole lot about their family. They don't know who their dad is. They've had very little contact with their grandmother. All they know is that their mother was something of a legend in this town, and then she left to, I think that's in Vermont. Maybe it's one of the other 4 books that I have to do a review on. But she left with hopes of stardom, got to California, legitimately failed at her acting career, somehow got pregnant, drug and alcohol issues, and now she is in rehab. So Ezra and Ellery show up in Echo Ridge, and one of the first things they stumble across is a dead body, and that would be one of the teachers at their future school. So this is the first mystery we kind of encounter. And maybe the first mystery and a half, because the first mystery is really what happened to their aunt. Anyways, we meet Malcolm, and I guess maybe it's like 2.5 mysteries. What happened to their aunt? What happened to the teacher? And then there's Malcolm, whose brother a couple of years earlier had been dating a girl who ended up dead. His family is sort of shunned, particularly their brother Declan, who ends up moving out. I call it kind of 2.5 mysteries because when their grandmother comes to pick up Ezra and Ellery, she is driven by the mother of this dead girl. So we're introduced to a lot of elements, and it's great. Like, we set up a really great storyline, and that's kind of what the book is about, is why do these teenage girls keep going missing or winding up dead? And then what is the backstory behind a couple other elements? Just to spoil it all, Malcolm's family was sort of shunned because Declan is basically the only person of interest. So even though he's never convicted of murdering his girlfriend, that's what everybody thinks. This causes problems within their parents' already troubled marriage. The dad leaves, the mom ends up remarrying this super wealthy, influential man within their community, and then he has a daughter who is Malcolm's age, and he ends up being the murderer of all of these girls. This is something that I had a problem with because I think the aunt's name is Sarah. We really were clued in early on about her disappearance, and it is ultimately dropped until the very end of the novel when we learn that Malcolm's stepdad killed Declan's girlfriend, killed the other girl who goes missing in this time period. And then we learn that, yes, he actually killed Sarah as well, thinking that she was Ellery's mother. The end of this book dragged on a little too much. Even the sleuthing element, it wasn't what it needed to be in order to make this an interesting mystery. And then that goes to the title, Two Can Keep a Secret. Who are we talking about in terms of keeping secrets? So we have a secret of Malcolm's stepdad being the murderer. We have a secret of Peter is the stepdad. Katrin is the stepsister. And then Brooke Bennett is the girl who goes missing recently. What happens is Ellery and Ezra show up to town, and all these dead girls are homecoming queens. So homecoming is happening right when they show up. Actually, it's really strange. I guess because this school starts later, like this school year starts later, they do a lot of homecoming prep before school even starts, which includes voting for homecoming court before school even starts. I think that's really strange, especially in a situation like this where Ellery is completely new. Like, nobody can know her. So how can you appropriately vote when you don't have all the facts? it really doesn't even matter in this instance, because what happens is Ellery and Brooke and Katrin are voted onto homecoming court. All these strange things start to happen, and they all have a connection to Malcolm. So now it's like, oh, well, since Declan was obviously guilty of killing his girlfriend, Malcolm must be behind all the strange stuff surrounding homecoming and all the threats that these homecoming princesses, or whatever you want to call them, are being given or subjected to. Let me get back to my point. Katrin ends up being behind some of these threats. In the beginning, it's actually another girl from her little friend trio. This girl, in order to get into an Ivy League college, she's a journalist, okay? And she is told, you know, your stuff's good, but there's nothing really exciting, nothing unique. So she resurrects this homecoming queen tragedy, and she is the one posting all the death threats. She and Katrin are the ones who are behind getting Ellery on the court to make things more interesting, like even more interesting, because it was her aunt who was the original homecoming queen disappearer, even though it was Ellery's mom who was actually homecoming queen, but we'll get to that. Once this girl is discovered, Katrin takes up the mantle to continue the threats, but she's also trying to point a finger at Malcolm after Brooke disappears, at saying, well, Malcolm is obviously the murderer. That's something that I thought was a little easy, a little unexplained, because she thinks that Brooke likes Malcolm because Brooke had broken up with her boyfriend recently, and then Katrin had tried to hook her up with Malcolm, and then at some point during a sleepover, Katrin wakes up and Brooke is gone, so she's assuming Brooke is with Malcolm. All of these things that don't quite add up to me as a valid reason for Katrin to hate Malcolm, except for maybe his connection to Declan and Declan's connection to another dead homecoming queen. In any case, Peter kills Sarah, thinking that Sarah is her twin sister. Peter kills, what's the other girl? Who is the other homecoming queen? It doesn't matter. Peter kills Declan's girlfriend because they were involved, and then he kills Brooke because they were involved. So if you haven't picked up on this, Brooke was not sneaking out to Malcolm's room. Brooke was sneaking out to get jiggy with it with a 40 or 50-year-old man. Like, he kills these women because he's a psychopath. He likes young girls. He doesn't like when people threaten his security and his safety. He wants what he already has. He doesn't want them to ask more of him. So when that is threatened, he just kills them. When it comes to this ending, I was a little bit confused, and this just happens. It's the nature of an audiobook where you don't have the visual of a scene change. So we have this little dream scene in which Malcolm is talking to his best friend, who it turns out her sister and Declan have been secretly dating. And that's a little love triangle, because he and the dead girlfriend, he had been trying to break up with her and she wouldn't let it happen because he had fallen in love with the sister of all the people that I can't remember the names of. At the time of the girlfriend's disappearance, I think it was, the friend had made a comment to Malcolm and it had kind of stuck in his subconscious. So he has this dream in which it plants this thought in his head. So when he wakes up, he's starting to think about stuff. And then Ellery visits and they're talking, because Ellery is something of a mini detective. She loves crime shows and she thinks she knows all this stuff. And she really doesn't. She's a terrible detective, which I thought was a huge missed opportunity. It's like, if you're gonna put this element in there, you need to make it stronger. Like, you need to actually make her capable. But it didn't do anything, because she thought that the local police force, and one policeman in particular, were inept. So it was kind of like since they're not going to do it, I'm going to use my amateur sleuthing skills to figure stuff out. And she's completely wrong every time. Her clues really lead us nowhere. And in some ways it works because there's a lot of red herrings, but at the same time, it's just confusing and convoluted and uninteresting because it's going nowhere. At any rate, we get to the end where Malcolm has remembered this dream, and then Ellery has come over and they're talking things out, trying to fit things together. Malcolm realizes Peter's the bad guy. Then, again, this just feels underdeveloped, where Peter had come into the room. Malcolm apparently is not good at masking his emotions and somehow gives away that he knows something's not okay with Peter. Peter pretends to leave only to show up with a gun. He locks the two in a windowless storage room in the basement, and he turns on this, I think it's some kind of machine that will essentially kill them with carbon monoxide. Then he leaves. He does whisper, he's like, this was one thing I liked and disliked, because I love how in television shows and movies, the criminal gives it all away. They have this big reveal scene, so you finally get all your answers. And Peter's like, this isn't a movie. I'm not going to just tell you everything. But he does give some things away. And then he whispers something in Ellery's ear about her aunt. And it's at this point where you feel like she's getting an answer, and as soon as we get to her perspective, we're gonna get an answer about the aunt. But then when we do get to her perspective, she's like, oh, I have no clue what he said, blah, blah, blah. It's not until the epilogue that we learn what truly happened to Sarah, that he killed her thinking that she was her sister. That could have been so much better, and it just wasn't. We just get this really drawn out thing with the end, with Ellery and Malcolm getting locked in this room. Some of it just felt like the timing did not line up. I'm assuming McManus, sorry, I forgot her name. I was going to call her McDowell. I'm assuming McManus has done her research. If I were better with dimensions, I think I could have a better idea as to the size of this room and how quickly them passing out would happen. But it felt like it happened incredibly fast. At the same time, their being rescued happened incredibly fast because they didn't die. Yet, we're going to go on another little tangent here in a spoiler that I forgot to tell you about. The reason that Ellery thinks the police department is inept is because she meets this policeman, this cop named Ryan Rodriguez, who's relatively young. I think he's like 24 or something. He acts really funny around her and Ezra. So she's like, this guy just doesn't know how to do his job. What it turns out is he's their half-brother. Because when their mother came home for Declan's girlfriend's funeral, she slept with his father. Which I still don't understand why it happened. Because as far as I know, he was still married to the mother. And why she would sleep with such an old man, I want to say she was like 19, 20, 21. He was probably 40s or 50s. I don't, maybe this was in the audiobook and I simply tuned it out. But I don't know why she slept with this guy. In any case, she does. She gets pregnant. She won't tell anybody. But as soon as the kids show up in Echo Ridge, it's very obvious to Ryan that they are related to him. So throughout this whole book, his ineptitudes are really just an awkwardness of how do I go about this situation? So he figures something out. Oh, I know what had happened. Was Ellery had started to type a text message when Peter holds them at gunpoint. She wasn't able to finish it, but she did send it. And the only word was, or letter, I think was the letter P. So somehow he figures out Peter's behind it all. He races to the house and he catches Peter, and then he's somehow able to figure out where Peter hid the kids and rescue them before they die. And I was just like, what? It was overwhelming, and it just didn't feel possible. And then this reminds me of another spoiler that I forgot to tell you about, which this should not surprise any of us because it's been so long since I've read this book and I neglected to write notes. But another thing about the book was obviously the teacher's death. There's a moment where Malcolm and Ellery believe that Katrin killed him because, and this is something I feel like is a little wishy-washy within the plot, they get a job at this theme park that was initially named Murderland until these dead girls start showing up. So it's renamed, but still, they get a job there. They're in like this employee area during a school, not assembly, but a school. It's been so long since I've been in high school. What's it called again? Like a pep rally for homecoming. So they do it at this theme park. I can't remember why. I'm sure there's a valid reason. Really, it's all just to set up for this moment. They're there for that, but for some reason, they're in this employee-only area, and they hear something outside the door. And it turns out to be Brooke. Or maybe she's in another room. I don't know. I don't really care. The crux of the matter is she is trying to pick the lock of the recycling, like the shredder. We assume that her reasoning for all of this is referring to something else, but what it's actually referring to is, as I mentioned, she was having an affair with Peter while Katrin was out of town. They took Katrin's car, went somewhere, and then on the way back, they hit the teacher and kill him. In thinking that maybe Katrin is involved in all of this, or maybe, I don't know, anyways, the dynamic duo make their way to this box of paperwork that's supposed to be shredded or recycled or whatever. They find what Brooke had been looking for, which is a bill to repair the front of Katrin's car. So this is what leads them down a rabbit hole of trying to pin things on Katrin. I was just like, a lot of good things happened. A lot of good things were there to make this a really great book, but the execution fell short because maybe there was just too much going on and McManus didn't have enough time to properly develop it all and to tie it all off. And I kind of wanted a bit more suspense from it, a bit more questioning, a bit more whodunit. Like, I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to make assumptions and then be wrong. But there was so much going on. There were so many subplots that you couldn't focus on one enough to get a full view of it. And then we have to throw in the romance between Malcolm and Ellery, which it was probably the worst subplot of the novel because they had no chemistry. And it was something you expected from the very beginning, but again, there was so much going on that we couldn't give it the right amount of attention. And so I thought if we truly focused on all of the dead girls, and we focused on the mystery behind everything that was happening, and we had a lot of different suspects thrown in, and we had a lot of back and forth and, like, you know, cutbacks in which we think we're moving forward only to realize we're going in the wrong direction. But we didn't get enough of the girls to know motivations, to understand how they were connected, to understand, like, why things happened at all. Because I think that's a lot of a good mystery, is knowing the victim, is knowing how the victim can go from someone who is an innocent victim to someone who might have brought it on themselves. And then you add in the fact that Ellery's mother was the intended victim, yet we really don't get much of her either, except she's in rehab and she's breaking all the rules. She's keeping a lot of secrets from her kids, and I was just like, I needed something to hang on to. I needed something to sink my teeth into. And this book was just, there's too much going on. Oh, I'm sure there's so much that I have neglected, but as I said, I have many, many more reviews to do, and I want to keep this short. I didn't like it. I thought it was boring. I would recommend reading it rather than listening to it, because as much as I didn't care for Malcolm's narrator, I liked Ellery's narrator even less. She was a little too dry for me as well, and it's almost like she wanted to be sardonic, and she just achieved it a little too well. It lacked emotion, and so I was just like, I don't care about you, and then I don't care about him. The characters I did care about were all dead. It was messy. And it was well written to an extent. It was not well written in the sense that it was effective. But there we go. That is Two Can Keep a Secret. If you have any questions, if I have left you confused at all, reach out. And with that, do the whole like, subscribe, comment thing. And let's keep this moving. Bye.